you can see this is the outline of my talk. I should confess to you that I've never given, not only have I never given this talk, but I've never given a talk about anything except physics. So this is kind of about philosophy or whatever. So you're my guinea pigs. I hope it goes all right. So I want to talk about what science is, and you can see the outline of my talk. So let's just get started. I should do it this way. Is that it? Yes. Okay, so I'm not the first person who asked what science is. And if you just Google it, you know, definitions of science, you'll find all kinds of things. And I've taken a sampling. So I'm not sure I understand why it's not responding. Here. Okay. Responds with delay, I guess. So the National Academy of Sciences, in a kind of a tract, which I'll come to later, defines science: the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions. That's kind of the scientific method that they're defining, as well as the knowledge generated through this process. So it's both the scientific method and the output. That's what they call, that's their definition of science. In a paper by the biologist Stephen Jay Gould, he somehow says, well, the net of science covers the empirical universe. What is it made of? Fact, and why it works in theory. So that's basically the output for him. The Supreme Court, in a decision on evolution, in a case on evolution, famous case on evolution in 1993, had this somewhat wordy definition of science. It's not what it isn't. It's not an encyclopedic body of knowledge. It's about a process. So that's kind of the scientific method. Refining theoretical explanation of the word, but in order to qualify scientific knowledge, an inference or assertion must be derived by the scientific method. So that's the scientific method. In short, the requirement that experts establishes a standard of scientific evidentiary revival. That's a very wordy thing, but it's basically, well, science is the scientific method. There is also, there was a lecture, not well known, by Feynman on the same topic I'm talking about. What is science? So this is Feynman at his most idiosyncratic. I can also define science. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. That's science. That I consider kind of outrageous. But anyway, that's what he said in this lecture. Then there's another wonderful thing. It's not quite the definition of science, attributed to Feynman. Scientists need philosophers and historians of science like birds need ornithologists. So the idea is all this is completely irrelevant. You don't even need to listen. This is, as I say, Feynman at his most kind of outrageous. So my thesis is that it is clarifying to think of science as two different things, which I found no better way to, as what I call uppercase science and lowercase science. And I want to distinguish between the two, and I think that clarifies a lot of discussion, which I will explain the distinction. But in short, lowercase science is what we think of as science. It's the activities of scientists and their individual outputs, what scientists do and the knowledge they create. That's more or less the usual parlance. But then I want to define uppercase signs, which I will explain to you. It's a kind of a new concept, which I think is necessary, or at least useful. Uppercase science is a body of reliable knowledge, objective knowledge, that emerges from the activities of scientists. So for both science, upper and lowercase science, those activities are based on some underlying assumptions, which are essentially my summary of the scientific method. Okay? Now, this is not a credo. It's just an attempt to define the underlying assumptions which seem to govern. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. And consciously or unconsciously, it's more or less the way we all do business. That's the scientific method. But suppose I don't subscribe to the scientific method. Who's going to enforce it? Well, it doesn't really matter. Accepting these assumptions is not a requirement. It's just convenient, and it'll help you along if you do it. But it's not a condition for doing science. Anyway, this is my summary of the scientific method. 2 + 2 = 4, whether you believe it or not. It's not a credo. You should just hold on. Okay, so here are the assumptions. This is my summary of the scientific method. The world of observable phenomena is real in some sense and intelligible in a collective manner. Very important that it's a collective understanding. This is public knowledge, and it's subject to the requirements of logic and consistency. And knowledge of the natural world must, in addition, be based on observation and experimentation. But science is about more than the natural world. Mathematics is very much included in my definition, but it's not about the natural world. It's about the abstract world. Supernatural explanations are outside of science. We'll come back to that. Okay, so more on lowercase science. As I said before, it's the usual definition. It's what scientists do. And the only question is whether it's successful. Now, successful at what? Here are the things it attempts to do. Stimulate other science, is most of what we do. We write for each other. Okay, we work for each other. That's what publication means. And, of course, it's success in terms of useful applications to technology, to medicine, to whatever. That defines success of lowercase science. And, in addition, that's what I'm adding, that lowercase science is supposed to emerge into uppercase science. And part of the success, of course, is if it does that. And I'll explain that. Uppercase science, that's the new one. Here are its essential properties, characteristics. It's collective public knowledge, universal and consistent, by definition. But it's bathed in ignorance and subject to change. And I will try to explain how you can have all these things together. But the precise mechanism of this emergence is to some extent shrouded in mystery. It's just we can see its product, but the process is one I can't explain. It just happens. And you will, if you think about it, I think you will experience that also. Now, in addition, uppercase science provides the underlying corpus of knowledge by which we all can pursue and do our work, namely, attain successful new lowercase science. What we learn in school is a lot of the uppercase science, this corpus of reliable knowledge brought to us down from from our ancestors and in this process of emergence. Okay, let me continue. So now let me elaborate on what I just said. It's the collective public knowledge that emerges from lowercase signs. It belongs to no one and to everyone. It is universal and belongs to everybody. It is anonymous and therefore objective. When we say Newton's second law, we don't mean it's Newton's. It's mine as much as Newton's. 2 plus, it's not, it does not belong to Newton any more than 2 plus 2 equals 4 belongs to whoever thought it up first. No, it's everybody. We all own it. In contrast, Beethoven's symphonies, although we can all either play them or listen to them, they are really associated with Beethoven forever. Mozart's symphonies are Mozart's. And in a real sense, Newton's laws are not Newton's. So it's different from other things. So the first was collective public knowledge. It's universal and consistent by definition. There's no German science, US science, Indian science. I'm sorry, that's a mistake. That should be uppercase science. Because there is Indian science. I mean, most of, I meant uppercase. That's just a misprint. Any inconsistencies must simply, that you find, must simply be considered the unfinished business. They shouldn't be there. And that was just an error. By definition, it's universal and consistent, as I said. Think of arithmetic, or more generally, mathematics. That's my model for uppercase science, okay? I mean, there are people who like to define mathematics as being outside of science. I think it's much more helpful, especially for uppercase science, to think of mathematics, on the contrary, as being the prime example of collective public knowledge. Lowercase science is uppercase science in the making. It's also, of course, technology in the making or culture in the making. But one of the important functions of lowercase science, as I said before, is that it'll eventually, with some luck, emerge up to uppercase science. Now, the last one is that science is bathed in ignorance and subject to change. So it's not some fixed corpus. So let me elaborate on that. Thomas Kuhn, when he was talking about these great ideas and how they evolved, he used the metaphor of a revolution to describe major advances. And I was always bothered by that for various reasons. I won't go into that, but I would like to offer a different metaphor. And it's the metaphor of continents of scientific knowledge bathed in a sea of ignorance, with shifting and fuzzy shorelines. That's how I think of uppercase science. It's what emerges out of the sea of ignorance, of course, with the help of lowercase science. Now, the time scale for the changes is very, very slow, much slower than the time scale for what we call advances in lowercase science. Because most of that is just the process, and it takes a while to emerge up to something which is a continent emerging out of the sea. I think of it more like some kind of continental drift, which then changes the shorelines between the knowledge of uppercase science and the ignorance, which is the sea around it. Here are some quotes which I think illustrate that. A quote from David Gross: "The most important product of science is ignorance, which means leads to new questions and expands, makes the shore the ocean recede from the shoreline. Okay. Now I asked him, I could not find this written down. He said, actually, it's somebody else's quote, he thinks, and it was a slightly different quote. But it is, I heard it first from David. Here's another quote which I like. The power of science is the ability to know something without having to know everything, which is extremely important. And the last one from Phil Anderson, scientific knowledge is a multiply connected web. So it's not a continent, it's a web. Progress occurs at the periphery. And that illustrates the fact that you can't simply say, well, I like this part and I don't like this part. It's really connected, especially at this upper level of consistency. You can't pick and choose. Okay, so that's it. That's science, and uppercase and lowercase. Now, what's very important is that it is not all of human knowledge. The limits of science, both uppercase and lowercase, are very important to recognize and to try to understand. And I call whatever else there is non-science. Okay? Let me say a few things about non-science. Why do we know by definition that there is non-science? It's because science is universal and just objective truth in some sense. I would like to define it as objective truth. So it can't be the only source of human knowledge. In fact, by its very universality, it can't completely answer many, if not most of the questions that interest us. Questions about specific situations, individuals, communities. By definition, they're not covered by uppercase science and really not covered by lowercase science. For instance, so here's a list, a random list of questions which are legitimate questions, and most people are interested in this stuff. And by definition, science, I claim, can't really give answers. How do I find meaning in my life? How can I face death? Is this good or bad? Who should I vote for? Is there anything, here's a philosophical question. Is there anything real besides matter? Well, that sounds like a scientific question, but it isn't. Does God exist? So here are all the ways in which these questions can be answered: clinical psychology, ethics, politics, literature, philosophy, religion, etc. Fields where science, and I could add uppercase and lowercase science, may provide some input, but they're not fully or even wholly, or not even essentially answered by science. There's something else that goes into it. And these are completely legitimate questions. So there has to be something else besides either uppercase or lowercase. Let me continue. So besides alternative forms of pure knowledge, there are also practical skills and know-how that are just not universal. You know, how to deal with local situations. Those are all the kinds of things that science just by definition almost can't answer. But they're very necessary for civilization and culture. And they're what are contents of medicine. Medicine is not just a science. There's a lot of scientific input, but there's, as we all know, there's a lot more to being a good doctor than being some kind of very qualified scientist. Technology, politics, art, religion, agriculture. All this is lumped by me under non-science. And it combines features that are shared among various within various communities, large and small, and the diversity of different communities, and in an essential way. And very importantly, all these other things involve acts of human will or consensus. There's no will involved in science. You don't will 2 and 2 to be equal to 4. It just is that way, whether you believe it or not, or whether you want it or not. And that's different from successful non-science. That's a very important point. The role of free will in non-science. Now, science is an essential ingredient of non-science, but the very diversity of non-science implies that there needs to be a lot more. I'm just repeating the same thing in slightly different. And therefore, I want to claim that recognizing the limitations of science is essential for a proper understanding of science as how it contributes to civilization and culture, as well as for a dialogue between scientists and non-scientists. The tendency we have to gloss over the limits and limitations of science, I think, is bad for PR, infuriates people, and it's also completely irrational, as I have tried to explain. So this is a very important ingredient. Well, in summary, I want to ask, what are possible rational attitudes toward uppercase science? Now, first, attitudes toward lowercase science are no different from attitudes toward any other human activity. They're extremely varied. I mean, lowercase science is a human activity. It's contingent. There are all kinds of local variations, and it all works itself out. And if it's in some sense successful, as I said before, it then emerges into some kind of collective thing, which I've called uppercase science. So there is no way to classify attitudes toward lowercase science. My question is, what about attitudes toward uppercase science? That's very unique, and it's what I called objective knowledge, because it's anonymous and universal. I want to claim that there are only 3 sensible attitudes, no more. The first is you can ignore or totally distort it, which is the choice of a majority of people, to ignore it. After all, most people aren't experts on uppercase science. You can attempt to learn it, and that's the most constructive attitude you can have. Try to learn it. You can attempt to contribute, but you can't, because you can't do that directly. You can only do it indirectly by engaging in science. Individuals don't contribute to uppercase science. How science will emerge from that activity, from your contributions to lowercase science, as mentioned earlier, is unpredictable and mysterious. Neither Newton nor Einstein, let alone Hohenberg, let alone any of you, contribute to uppercase science, only to lowercase. Uppercase science gets created by some kind of collective emergence action. But it follows from these 3 sensible attitudes, that I claim that science is immune to criticism. You can't, there's nobody there to criticize. Think of trying to criticize Pythagorean theorem. It just makes no sense. You can ignore it, you can attempt to learn it, you can indirectly try to contribute. But, you know, who knows how that will work out? There has to be some kind of collective phenomenon. And so criticism is just irrelevant. Okay, so that's it for what is science. Now I want to talk about, at one end of non-science, there's religion. And I want to talk more directly about the relationship of science and religion, because that's a lot of what people talk about. First, let me give as an example, there's a pamphlet on evolution, science, evolution, and creationism, written by the National Academy of Sciences in 2008. And here's what they have to say about science and religion. It's a little long, but I want to go through it. They're based on different aspects of human experience. Okay. In science, the explanation must be based on evidence, yada, yada. Scientifically based observations that conflict with explanation must lead to modification. That's the scientific method. Okay? Fine. We can all agree with that. That's really mostly lowercase science. Religious faith, in contrast, does not depend only on empirical evidence, is not necessarily modified in the face of conflicting evidence, and typically involves supernatural forces or entities. Because they're not part of nature, supernatural entities cannot be investigated by science. In this sense, science and religion are separate and address aspects of human understanding in different ways. Attempts to pit one against the other create controversy where none needs to exist. Well, if you reread this a few times, I'm not sure you'll understand quite precisely what they mean. What are these supernatural forces or entities? What are they talking about? What aspects of human understanding are addressed by religion? They don't say. And if you read the whole pamphlet, they don't clarify these questions. I don't know how many of you have read this. It's mainly about evolution, the defense of evolution against many, many attacks. And which one is close to the truth? Science or religion? Well, they don't really say. My reaction to this paragraph is first that it was written by a committee and that it was written with primarily a political goal in mind, is not to offend too many people and yet to defend science and try to somehow take care of this nasty subject. But it doesn't clarify anything. So what I have modestly attempted to do is to try to actually clarify the relationship between science and religion. Okay. I want to talk about uppercase and lowercase religion. Okay, and here goes. Overall, religion in general is a crucial element of non-science, which is what I said before. It's just sort of at one end of a large spectrum of different things. It addresses questions about individual and collective beliefs, values, emotions, and importantly, involves human free will in a very important way. So it cannot lead to universal answers valid for anybody. Okay, that's my statement. That to me, that's obvious. Of course, lots of people might give you an argument. So I propose to clarify the relationship and conflict between science and religion by, in a sense, defining it away, i.e. by introducing, once again, new language, as I did before. Uppercase religion, okay, is the set of explicit or implicit principles by which any individual conducts his or her life. These are the core commitments, beliefs, or habits that govern any person's existence. So uppercase religion is something that pertains to everyone in this room, assuming that you are conscious, even asleep, and a human being. Under this definition, religion is universal for any conscious human being, though its content, what you believe, i.e., lowercase religion, which I'll come to, varies from person to person. So by this definition, atheism, agnosticism, or the denial of any kind of religion belong to uppercase religion, even though they're not considered to be religious in the normal nomenclature. Religious is what I call lowercase religion. By lowercase religion, we mean more or less what is understood in usual parlance, a community of worshipers who subscribe to some common beliefs. It is one possible element of uppercase religion, but not the only one. So I would like to define uppercase religion universally. Of course, there's a long history of advocacy of universal lowercase religion. It's a feature of the past. That's what people believed almost universally in the past. Of course, they couldn't quite agree on which religion is universal. That mankind should have outgrown. That's my view. Modern advocates of a universal religion are either feared or pitied or locked up. Okay, so let me elaborate and conclude. Science and religion, by my definition, the uppercase, represent what Stephen Jay Gould defined as a non-overlapping magisterium, which is known as NOMA. And I think my definitions and my exposition really are examples of that. And I say the opposite of uppercase science is ignorance. It's not non-science, it's just ignorance. The opposite of religion is death. Every conscious individual has uppercase religion. Remember, according to our definition. Religion is deeply personal. Science is deeply impersonal. Religion embodies diversity, community, and free will. Religion should not only be tolerated, it should be celebrated. It's an existential necessity. Science, on the other hand, has no room for diversity or free will. The main error of religious zealots is to believe that the specific answers represent objective truth valid for everyone. That's, of course, follows from what I'm saying. And the only way to attain objective truth is just to ask questions for which objective true answers are relevant. But if you ask another class of questions, then they will have another class of questions will have particular answers. The ones that lead to objective are the so-called scientific questions. They're certainly interesting and useful, but they're not every question we're interested in. In fact, most people are interested in all the other questions. The truth of my faith does not invalidate the truth of your faith. In contrast to the case of scientific truth. Scientific truth, if you believe or if you accept one thing, there can't be two contradictory ways. As I said, uppercase science is by definition consistent. Otherwise, if there is an inconsistency, then you go back to the drawing table, as we all know. That's lowercase science. Okay, let me conclude. What is my aim here? To clarify what science is and is not. To calm the so-called science wars, which raged, let's say, mostly 20 years ago, where it was kind of a cultural war, mostly, as far as I know, in the United States and Europe, between advocates of the power of science and advocates of the contingent aspect, science as a social construct. Those were the science wars, and this is my kind of summary of how to answer it. By redefining uppercase science and religion, to celebrate both by showing how vital they both are, they each are, for civilization and culture, and in what sense each one is universal. Uppercase science is universal by its content. Uppercase religion is universal not by its content, but by the fact that it is something that pertains to everybody. Whereas uppercase science, there's only a small group of us who really learn it and embrace it. So it's a different sense in which they're universal, but they are both, in their own sense, universal. What are the implications? Well, first, let me hasten to say, I'm not claiming this is the only way to define these, but I want to claim that it's a clarifying perspective. It short-circuits many fruitless arguments. I believe that if you think of science and religion in this way, it makes sense of things. That's why I'm standing here and telling you about it. For example, our point of view makes sense of ecumenism, the attempt at constructive dialogue between various organized religions, in contrast to the traditional perspective. I have never been able to find anybody who will explain to me what the principle is of ecumenical discussions, except a political principle. But if people are claiming that their religion is kind of the only route to salvation, what does it mean to get together with other religious faiths? And I've never seen that articulated. Here, it's obvious. Open questions. This model, I believe, works well for mathematics and the so-called natural sciences, physical science and bioscience. And they're what I have in mind. And most of the philosophical discussions I've read actually are really about the definition of the natural science. And the open question is it really adapted to the so-called human sciences, psychology, anthropology, sociology, economics, political science? That I consider to be an open question, because I don't know whether there is an uppercase science of the human sciences. And the question in my mind is it simply that these are in less advanced stages of development? Or is it that the concept just doesn't work? And I think for a lot of what the philosophical discussion of science is, suffers from this lack of clarity. this is my summary, other summary, which is there. And with that, I thank you for your attention. Questions, comments? Contradictions? Yes. I think they want you to use the
You are a originator of density functional theory as well as the dynamical scaling theory of critical phenomena. What do you mean by these things?
Oh.
You mean to say you want to change over the Andrew's explanation to the suitable suspicions?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question.
You said that you are the originator of
Yes.
density functional theory.
Yes.
And of the dynamical scaling theory of critical phenomena.
Right. Those are just two of the fields in which I have worked, as was mentioned by Chandan, and they're just fields of science which.
So, what is your question about this topics?
This question is about critical state of a substance, critical state, critical phenomena of gases and liquids.
Yeah.
These two theories are applicable to the originating substance.
What kind of substance?
I'll take
the two are completely different areas of science, which I worked on at different times, and they're just things I worked on, as Chandan mentioned.
No, these may be many more, but they're confined to only one phenomenon.
Yeah, this isn't about the. Let's talk. Yeah, let's ask some questions. Yeah.
So you mentioned that the emergence of the big signs from the small signs is, of course, very mysterious.
Lowercase and uppercase.
Yes.
Lowercase is a lot bigger.
Yes,
what we all do.
The uppercase signs,
Right.
the emergence of uppercase signs from the lowercase signs is shrouded in mystery. I was under the impression that the consensus has a lot to play in this aspect. The consensus, for example, if you think of the climate change question, but you seem to suggest that the consensus is not part of the scientific.
No, I don't consider that climate change is really uppercase science. That's just a scientific consensus about a problem. I'm talking about things like quantum mechanics and, the Navier-Stokes equations. They may change around the border, but they're there, and you can't change them. And classical mechanics also in its own domain. And mathematics, I'm thinking about kind of high-level things, which are true they're kind of objective truth. You're not going to modify. You can, of course, modify, just like classical mechanics it didn't get overthrown. That's the trouble with Kuhn. It got enlarged, and by both quantum mechanics and relativity, but it's still there in its domain of validity. So that's what I think of as uppercase science. It's I would say climate change is not quite. It's of course bathed in a lot of scientific ignorance, and so that really has issues of consensus, but not many issues. There are issues on where the sea of ignorance invades the consensus. And that's actually a serious scientific question. Okay, so Yes.
Yeah, just to press a little bit more on this point. I agree that in the natural sciences, it's a lot clearer what is objective truth, and eventually there is a continent But I'm less clear about the timescales in the biosciences, for instance, where there might be theories that might be considered valid, which might have long lifetimes that people hold on to, but eventually newer, I have at the back of my mind something like Lamarckian model for evolution versus a Darwinian model. So when would what are the timescales one would talk about for the emergence of capital science from?
So let me, before I answer that question, say something that I didn't mention, and that is there can be a legitimate controversy, legitimate disagreements as to whether some element of science has yet emerged, whether it is really uppercase or still lowercase. My view, and this is just a personal, non-expert, but not completely ignorant view, is that biology has almost no theoretical continents. It has a lot of factual continents, like evolution. But the theory of evolution, in my view, is the ignorance is bigger than the continent. There's a huge amount of completely irrefutable data, but there isn't much theory. There's a concept, which is evolution, but we don't know where it comes from. We don't really know. This is, a personal view which I got from talking to various people. I'm not an expert, but if you mention the questions about biology are really just questions about whether things have emerged. For the human sciences, it's about whether it will somehow ever emerge, whether the model is right. In biology, I'm convinced the model is right, but I'm not convinced that there are any theoretical continents. It may be only factual continents. Yes. A continent. Well, some understanding of evolution. But I think it's still immature. Now, that's a legitimate question, but it isn't legitimate in mathematics and in not only physics, but in many other areas of the physical sciences. It's pretty clear what is up there and well understood theoretically. But experimentally, well-established facts, they're continents also. And there are a huge number of those in biology, evolution being one of them. The fact of evolution, the tree of life. Way in back.
How would you respond to Feyerabend's science is religion statement? Do you think it's just wrong, or is it a case of like lowercase versus uppercase?
Yeah, I think both. Both. It's wrong in both uppercase and lowercase, but it refers to lowercase. I think it's just somebody who hasn't really, whom were you quoting? Feyerabend, yes. Well, this is kind of an answer. Already distinguishing between uppercase and lowercase clarifies that discussion. And to think that uppercase science is religion, I think it's just plain wrong. Lowercase science is just something that's so varied and so many people do. It's also wrong, but it's kind of wrong in a different way. There was somebody there, yeah? Yeah.
So can a person at the same time be both deeply religious and highly scientific?
Of course, because the religion is a personal thing. Well, are you talking about uppercase religion or lowercase religion? Uppercase religion, all you have to do is live and breathe. Okay? There's no entrance requirement. Lowercase religion, you know, that just kind of depends on what your religion is and how tolerant it is. And that's, but in my definition, by definition, because if you're a zombie, you can't do science. So if you're not a zombie, you're religious.
I just wanted to point out that 7 years ago, on the foundation day, when the foundation stone was laid, David Gross gave a talk on the role of theory in science. And the quote I have here from him is, "The ultimate product of science is the understanding of nature, a successful theory." So perhaps there are two David Gross quotes.
Well, yeah, I mean, one doesn't contradict the other. I heard it from David in a discussion, and then I asked him for the reference, and he gave me a reference to a different quote. Yeah? We can't hear, I don't think it's working.
Yeah. So you had said that the uppercase science is immune to criticism. But I think, I mean, if we look at classical mechanics, then it was criticized, which was an activity of lowercase science, which later emerged as uppercase science. So it is, I guess, not exactly immune to criticism.
Right. In the process of these large emergence of new continents, which is essentially what the understanding, not that of exactly criticizing, saying classical mechanics is wrong, but placing it in this marvelous, huge context, which is relativity and quantum mechanics, and it's a corner of both. I'm saying, yes, that's part of the evolution, but it's not what I would call criticizing it. It is questioning where the shoreline is. What exactly is the bath of ignorance, the sea of ignorance that it is bathed in? It's not what I would call criticism. It's slightly mincing words. I understand what you're saying, and it's absolutely true. That's how it advances, in fact. But it's not what I would call criticizing. It is engaging in the lowercase science, which will then help this other process, which is this continental drift, which this geological process. Okay, it's just a way of talking. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know if can you hear me?
Yeah.
I had two short questions. One, I was wondering how much traction you have with your ideas on religion when talking to those religious people who feel that the domain of religion includes facts about the world, where the universe came from, how old it is, and so forth. Do you actually get your ideas across and convince people?
Well, first of all, I haven't engaged. As I said, this is.
Yeah, but I mean over coffee or something.
This is, well, I haven't engaged in this stuff over coffee. This is the first time I've given a talk on this subject. I've also written a paper which is entitled What is Science, which has about 3/4 of what I said, but it didn't have much of the religion part, which is sort of newer. And I submitted it to a number of journals and I have a perfect score of being rejected every place I've submitted.
Short question.
Well, they tend to be, there's a lack of such journals, and they tend to be pretty technical. And the professional philosophers didn't like this stuff. So
I see.
the main answer to you is that I haven't engaged other people. I haven't tried to sell this. You're the first customers.
I would just have a short science question. You were talking about theory and biology and about evolution being something which is more a conceptual framework than a theory. But
oh, in my view, it's a marvelous set of facts.
no, but I was going to suggest that, in the case of organisms which are relatively simple and have a rapid turnover, you can do much more than just say that it's a conceptual framework. You can actually calculate outcomes.
Right.
I mean, the Luria-Delbruck experiment onward, there are calculable outcomes to test what should happen if evolution by natural selection holds,
Right.
and if it doesn't, and it's done very well in those. So
Right.
in that sense, it's not only a framework.
No, yes. Right, but human evolution is which is what I was.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. So you had mentioned in your this thing one of the quotes was the opposite of religion, capital higher uppercase religion is death. So I would like to ask if you would consider the same thing for perhaps animals or a person who is like in vegetative state, who perhaps is not conscious of his existence in that way. It is like with respect to your perspective on this.
No, my perspective, the way I define this is religion doesn't cover either animals or humans in a vegetative state. Just that's the way I define it, because I think it's useful to define conscious thinking human beings as religion as covering those people, but all of them.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I had a very simple question. So when lowercase science is termed as uppercase science, during the transition, what do you think is the characteristic of the transition? Is it consensus, which I think you spoke about? Is it a certain level of objectivity? I just want to know, how do you characterize the transition from lowercase to uppercase science? And
I characterize it as emergence, which means that it's a collective phenomenon. We scientists are molecules. Uppercase science is temperature, okay? No molecule can change the temperature of a gas. And somehow temperature emerges. And of course there are some molecules that are more important than others, the Newtons and the Einsteins. But they're not, it's not their contribution that is the emergent phenomenon of classical mechanics or relativity. So it's a collective. The only way I have to characterize it is, any collective property is termed emergent. And that's a model which I think serves very well. And I don't know what to say beyond that. Well, consensus is a collective property, but it has to kind of outlive consensus. It has to repeatedly be subject to tests. It's not because, and that's one of the one of the things I'm kind of trying to fight. The idea that, you know, the good old boys get together and decide that F equals MA. No, every day in hundreds of laboratories, these things get tested. And consensus sounds too much like some kind of conspiracy. And that is certainly what the science wars were about. And I'm saying, well, that's just ignorant. Not the way things work. But one has to recognize that, that you have to say that this applies to restricted areas of human activity, not to everything. And that's where the limitations of science come in.
So does science can answer this question like why something exists?
No.
So where does...
Well, it can answer questions of mechanism, you know, how do you get from one thing to the other? But that's too general. But certainly, you know, why do I exist?
I mean, anything in general. The existential fact that something exists.
No.
So where does it fall in? I mean, where does one try to find an answer for questions like this?
That's part of non-science. Well, religion or whatever. It's part of non-science.
Okay, so one more question then. So does ever capital science, I mean the uppercase science, well, can it become a lowercase science?
Demergence. I don't know. No, no, I don't see any useful way in which that could happen.
Explain the latest concept of electron.
Well, you got to use the microphone.
Okay, so as you defined uppercase science and religion as two non-overlapping things. Now, suppose what I am asking you, okay, can we push the boundary of uppercase science towards religion? Can we just, you know, I mean, so...
No,
I mean,
because religion is diverse. As I said, it's diverse. Your faith and my faith can contradict each other. There's no problem.
I'm talking about the uppercase religion.
Yes.
Consistent over.
It's not consistent. It's diverse. It's universal in the sense that everybody has some uppercase religion. But the content of that is diverse and depends on the free will of the individual. In science, there is no free will. You can't have one half of the room F equals MA and the other half of the room F equals MB.
But I'm not worried about the contents. I'm worried about the product, about, you know, so can we, you know, answer the question through science? I'm just asking you that there is a non-overlapping region, but can we push the boundary of science towards so that the stuff which could be, you know, which we think cannot be, you know, right now we think that it cannot be answered by science. Can we push the boundary and can we decrease the area of religion?
I claim no by definition.
There will always be some sets of events which would not be, you know, answered by science, but
yes, there have to be, and we should celebrate those, not tolerate them, celebrate them. And the National Academy of Science tends to tolerate religion, just so it'll stay out of trouble. Here's give him the last question.
Here we go. On the one hand, you describe uppercase science as something that's immutable. 2 + 2 = 4.
Not immutable.
Well, I guess you want things that are just are true, like 2 + 2 = 4, F = ma. But 2 + 2 = 4 was true 4.5 billion years ago, before there was life on this earth. So there's some aspect of your definition of uppercase science, which is it.
No. It is human knowledge. It is human knowledge. I'm not, it may be knowledge about things, but I'm defining it as human knowledge. It's just
Human
collective knowledge.
It's a combination of something which is sort of absolutely true and the fact that we know it is what.
Right. I'm only referring to the human knowledge, and human knowledge didn't exist before, not only before there were human beings, but before there was a degree of civilization that could actually formulate this knowledge. So that's what I think science is. It's not nature. Science is knowledge of nature. So I don't accept your premise that 2 + 2 = 4. There were, electrons appeared at the time of whatever it was, recombination. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the science, which is the knowledge. And there's collective knowledge, and then there is the knowledge each one of us has.
Okay. If there are no other questions, let's thank Pierre once again.